Bonjour tout le monde! Welcome back to Oui In France. I'm Diane, and today I'm coming to you from a very chilly Western France. I have my hoodie on, which is a rare occurrence for me, but it's below freezing or right around 32 Fahrenheit, 0 Celsius, which is rare as well for my area of France, so we're just going to go with it. But if you've been following me a while, you know that for about a decade here on Oui In France, I've been discussing cultural differences between the US and France, and also my own personal experience about what it's been like as a foreigner in France. Now, sometimes the topics I cover are a bit harder hitting, they're more serious, and other times they're a bit lighter and a little bit easier to digest. And today we're keeping it light. I'm going to get right into 6 strange things that I do when I now visit the US because I live in France. All right, so part of living abroad is adapting to a new culture and experiencing all the ups and downs, and there are plenty that come with it. And then one day, there comes a point when you've adapted so well to your French life that you start incorporating these little French habits into how you do things when you visit your home country. So let's get right into these 6 strange things I do when I'm back stateside because I live in France. Number 1, I mispronounce both my first and last name on purpose. Okay, yeah, it sounds strange, but it's true. I actually mispronounce both my first name and last name to make it easier for everyone. So to give you an example so you know what I'm talking about, when speaking French, my American first name, Diane, it gets a French pronunciation. And when speaking English, my French last name gets an anglicized one. So like I said, my name is Diane. Welcome if you're new here. And that's how we say it in English. But I haven't been Diane since 2012 here when I moved to France. And that's because the French, they don't have that vowel sound, that same Diane, that sound. And so if I said, hi, my name's Diane, they couldn't really say it exactly right. So I've been Diane, for about a decade. And if you look at the name D-I in French is D, not die. And to give you an example, Princess Diana to the French was Princess Diana. So that's how I introduce myself in French. I pronounce my name incorrectly on purpose, the way the French do. And I say, hi, I'm Diane, so that way people can say it. Diane just doesn't work. And about my last name, it starts with a W, and when speaking English, I always anglicize that French name now. I only started doing this about maybe 2 years ago after just realizing it's way easier to use the English pronunciation with English speakers. So like I said, the W in French, it's a V sound, so instead of W, it's V, but it gets mispronounced. And I also say the R in my last name, like an American. So like Wagner instead of Wagner, something like that. You know, it's just way easier to say the R like an American, and it's for the best. It's easier that way. I say my French name, how it's supposed to be pronounced in France, and I say my American first name, how it's supposed to be pronounced in English, and just kind of bridge the gap in between the two. And honestly, I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to be fancy by pronouncing my last name all French. Remember, I made a whole video telling you why I don't like telling people I live in France. Yes, seriously, so watch that. All right, number 2, I make raspberry sounds in conversation. If you read my blog, I'll link it below. I made a whole video with audio examples of French speech noises. And one of my favorites is this mouth sound that I'll call raspberries. It sounds like this. And it sounds like something a kid would do, or a sound you'd kind of make at a baby, you know, like something a baby would do, right? But it's actually a very lovely French sound. It's used quite a lot, and it means, I don't know.
Oh, what time are you going to the pool later?
I don't know. And honestly, the first time I heard an adult do this in France, I did a double take because it came out of nowhere, and I didn't expect a fart sound to come out of this very prim and proper person's mouth. But, you know, I've adapted, I make the sound, and sometimes I even do it in English. All right, number 3, I put a spoon in a bottle of open sparkling wine to make sure it stays fresh for the next day. I'll put a video up here so you know what I'm talking about. But this one actually works. I don't know the science of it, but it seems to work. So what I'm describing is if you open a bottle of sparkling wine, before you put it back in the fridge when you're done with it and there's still wine left, just pop the back end of a spoon in there with the oval spoon part sticking out. You know, just leave it dangling. Don't cap it. Don't try to do anything else. Just put the spoon in the top, put it in the fridge, and you're going to preserve the bubbles for the next day. It won't be flat. It'll still have a lot of life in it. And this can be done with any type of champagne or sparkling wine. One of my favorites is Crémant, a really nice sparkling French wine that's a lot cheaper than champagne. There's ones from here where I live in the Loire Valley, in Alsace, all over. Keep an eye out for Crémant in your liquor store because it's worth a taste. All right, next, number 4, I'm overly socially polite. While some people in the US always say, hello, thank you, have a good day, goodbye, every time they interact with someone, a cashier, just anyone, it's not required to say all that, and most people say much less in their interactions. Maybe a quick hi and a thanks. Like, honestly, in the US, just a friendly hello and thank you are totally fine when you interact with shopkeepers, store employees, and that sort of thing. Saying hello, thank you, wishing a cashier an exuberant good day, in New York City is definitely going to get some side eye. Like, that's not really done. But in France, you know all about the importance of saying bonjour because I've drilled that into your head for good reason, and all the other conversational niceties that I've talked about on my channel. In France, social politeness is something the French take seriously. Doesn't mean they're overly polite people in general, but that social politeness is really important. And this is something that is definitely carried over to how I interact with Americans when I'm back in the US. And it's funny because my family members or just friends and other Americans who have observed me have even commented on my politeness, like when I order at a restaurant or just anything. And my politeness, my default level has definitely ramped up over the years, and that's because of France. And that's a good thing. I personally enjoy being super polite. It really does come naturally now after about a decade in France, since it's the norm here. All right, 5. I eat dinner later. Now, I'm not a total convert. I do reserve the 8 p.m. dinner time for when I'm in France. For everyday weeknight dinners when I'm just home here in France, my normal dinner time is usually a bit later than what it used to be growing up, especially if I'm dining, with Tom's family, other French people. And in the US, when I go back to visit, my normal family's dinner time is probably more like 6:37. For me, the perfect time would be 7:30, but when in Rome and all, I adapt. I do what my family does now. Since I'm the outsider, even if I'm used to eating a little later in France, we adapt. I do what they do. All right, number 6, I no longer tip at restaurants. Just wanted to let that land a minute. I'm totally kidding. I am totally kidding. I tip properly when I'm in the United States. I'm a good tipper, having been a server once myself, and I treat restaurant workers well. So it was just a little joke to see if you're paying attention. And I actually despise bad tippers. There were a bunch of comments in my previous 2 videos about what the French versus Americans find rude, and people were saying 20% is not the norm, and I only tip if the meal's good. But look, the waiter or waitress, they don't have any say over if your meal is good. And I personally don't care for the tipping culture. I think the practices in the US have gotten a bit crazy over the years. But you know what? Hate the game. Don't hate the player. It's not the server's fault. People are just trying to make a living, so I feel like we need to do our part. But anyway, I do feel that like 15-ish to 20%, depending on where you're eating and where you are in the country, that's the norm. 15 to 20%. It's not optional. And I'm happy to say that this is one habit that hasn't worn off on me after living in France. In France, for the record, I do tip, but I do what's normal here in France. And tipping 20% is not normal since waiters are paid a full-time salary, unlike most servers in the US who depend on tips to live. So in France, you don't have to tip. It's not considered rude. But if you do tip, you could round a bill up. You can leave a few extra euros for a great meal and service, but not 20%. That would be unusual and a bit strange. But as always, I'd love to hear from you below. Tell me in the comments what things you now do in your home country because living abroad has worn off on you a little bit. With that, I'm going to leave it here for today. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you back on Oui In France soon. Salut!